Welcome to the Attorney Post, your source for inside baseball talk about the legal field with the top attorneys in the country. Here's your host, Justin West.
Hey, everybody, this is Justin West with the Attorney Post. Welcome back. Today, I'm joined with Michael Cardamone, and he is the chief cook and bottle washer over at Cardamone Law out in Philly. He runs an exclusive boutique law firm that specializes in workers' comp. We're going to be talking with him a lot today here on the Attorney Post, where you come to get news and resources and information from attorneys who are at the top of their field in any particular niche. Because remember, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. We'll be talking with Michael here in just a minute. We're going to jump over first, as always, and take a look at his site. You can visit Cardamone Law. That's CARDAMONELAW, CardamoneLaw.com. As always, we'll have links to his information down in the show notes below. He is actually a veteran podcaster. He's been on a number of podcasts, and we should have a good conversation today. As always, we're going to read from one of our sponsors first. Our first sponsor today is going to be InjuryAttorneyLeads.com. If you're an injury attorney, you know that finding new clients can be an expensive process. Most lead companies charge hundreds of dollars for leads that simply fill out a form. It's up to you to verify the information, that it's correct, and then chase them down, get them on the phone, and oftentimes it can take 10 leads or more in order to get an actual client. The solution is InjuryAttorneyLeads.com. InjuryAttorneyLeads.com has people reaching out to them across the country. Once they fill out a form, which is where most other lead generation companies stop, InjuryAttorneyLeads.com is just getting started. They reach out to every person who fills out a form and re-verifies the information on the phone before live transferring qualified individuals directly to your law firm. That means that the individuals that they transfer to you are guaranteed to be people who have been in an accident and who want to talk to a lawyer about their case. You can be sure that these potential clients meet your criteria for a qualified lead, and close rates average above 60%. Set up a time to talk with a client generation specialist by visiting InjuryAttorneyLead.com and clicking on any of the buttons to schedule a time to talk today. Again, that's InjuryAttorneyLeads.com. All right, and I've got Michael with me. Michael will be with us static today. We're not going to have him on the video, so you guys are going to have to just put up with looking at my face for most of the day here. But how you doing, Michael?
Doing great. How about yourself, Justin?
I am doing good. So Michael runs Cardamone Law. It's an eponymous law firm, of course, named after his own last name. And it dedicates 100% of the practice. He dedicates 100% of his practice to the strong representation of injured workers under the Pennsylvania Workers' Compensation Act. Michael is a graduate of Villanova University School of Law, graduated in 1999. He's been recognized by the Best Attorneys of America, Super Lawyers, Top 100 Pennsylvania, Lawdragon. He has a 10 out of 10 rating on Avvo, and he's an avid martial artist who brings his fighting spirit to each and every case that he takes on to ensure the rights of his clients are protected. So the first question I always like to ask Michael is, what did I miss?
Well, you covered a pretty good array of features there about myself, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more. I went to St. Rose of Lima in North Wales, Pennsylvania for 8 years, a good old fashioned Catholic grammar school. And after that, I attended St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia, which is an all-boys preparatory school. And then from there, I went to Boston College, graduated with a philosophy degree. And from there, I went to Villanova for law school. And then after that, I passed the bar exam and started practicing in 1999. And here I am 22 years later, still enjoying it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what made you decide that law was the area that you wanted to go into? And then why workers' comp?
So first thing is my dad was an attorney, and I had a lot of exposure to legal concepts and what a lawyer does. He was very passionate about it. And, he would come home and talk about his cases at the dinner table. And I would learn all the players involved and even some of the legal issues. And it was always fascinating to me. And sometimes I would spend time in his office, to see him field telephone calls and talking with clients and things like that. I even worked there one summer in high school, just doing like miscellaneous things, filing, things like that. So I kind of always had a little bit of an inclination to pursue the law. And then in college, I started drifting towards philosophy. First, I started out in pre-med and was not enjoying the classes very much. So I switched over to English and philosophy, and I was really excelling there, especially with the philosophy courses, and found it really interesting. And a lot of the professors will talk about the idea that philosophy can blend well with the law in terms of your skill set, some of the critical thinking involved, and logic and things like that. So it was sort of a combination of a couple things. One, I knew a little bit about the law from watching my dad in action. Two, my major was sort of leading me towards either teaching or law school or some kind of grad school. Can't do too much with a philosophy degree in terms of, having a tangible place to leap from.
I have a bachelor's in philosophy and a bachelor's in history, and I always used to joke that I'm qualified to ask the deep questions in life, like paper or plastic, or you want fries with that?
That's right. Yeah,
Because
me too.
I got to ask, knowing that you went to a Catholic college, I know that they tend to have a really good grasp on Western philosophy there. Who's your favorite philosopher, or a couple of favorite philosophers? Because this is my own personal interest here.
I would probably say Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche was my favorite. He was just so intense, and some of his beliefs were just so kind of startling. He really got me thinking a lot about a lot of different topics. I also enjoyed Plato. I had a course called the Platonic Dialogues. That was really interesting and pretty challenging.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the philosophy courses. And so, kind of stepping back for 1 second, it was a combination of not really knowing what I was going to do after college, really enjoying philosophy, kind of having an idea that I would like the law. And those three factors sort of led me to the idea of, okay, let's take the the exam and look at law schools and see where I can get in, and then took it from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had a very similar trajectory. I actually almost got into law. I loved the LSAT. I like to take the tests. I thought the logic problems were a lot of fun. But when I actually went on and pursued my master's in philosophy and was working towards my PhD, and then kind of fell into marketing, et cetera. So, because that's just how I had 3 or 4 kids at the time, and I had to feed them. So law school or graduate school kind of went on the back burner for a little bit, but that's fascinating. So that's what got you into law itself. What about workers' comp? Why specifically do you focus on workers' comp?
Well, to be honest, I never even really heard of workers' comp before I graduated law school. Nobody in my family had been on the workers' comp. It wasn't one of the subject matters in law school. Pardon me. And I was looking for a job like everybody else in our class, and there was an opening at a small firm about 15 minutes from where I was living in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and I decided to give it a shot. I wasn't really sure what area of the law I wanted to get into. Then I had lunch with one of my dad's colleagues, and she's like, Mike, just jump in somewhere. You can always springboard from there, but get your feet wet, take a job and get moving. And it was kind of really spawned me to be more aggressive with my search. So I found this small firm. There was 3 or 4 attorneys, and I showed up, and the guy who happened to need the most work was the guy who was doing workers' compensation law, and he threw me right into the fire. I think I was in court the next day, probably white as a ghost and my heart pounding. So I just was like, oh my God, I'm in court. I just passed the bar, and this is crazy. But I started really realizing that it was a good fit for me. It was just sheer luck. Helping people, a lot of them are blue collar, and I sort of had a down to earth personality and was able to connect with them in a really nice sort of natural way. And so it was really just kind of random. I never really sat around as a child saying, oh my gosh, I want to do workers' comp law. I never even heard of it. But once I got exposed to it, I just kind of stuck with it, and then you become, proficient at it because that's what you're doing every day. then it sort of just snowballs from there. So yeah, it wasn't anything I had targeted ahead of time.
Gotcha. So for some of our listeners will stumble across this podcast because they'll find us here in Google or YouTube or one of the search engines, and they may have a question. The question might be this: how does a workers' comp specific attorney differ from, say, a regular personal injury attorney?
So workers' compensation, and I think this is true in most states. I can only speak for Pennsylvania for to be 100%. But we have a statute, and it's called the Pennsylvania Workers' Compensation Act. And so it's its own sort of animal, so to speak. And it only relates to employees, so it doesn't cover independent contractors. You have to be an employee, and you have to be injured in the course and scope of your employment. And if you can prove that, then there's essentially two types of benefits available. You have wage loss benefits and medical benefits. There's some other benefits that are like death benefits or what's called specific loss for certain kinds of disfigurement or amputations. But the general run-of-the-mill case is wage loss and medical benefits. So a personal injury case is a broader category, and personal.
Oh, we're losing you there.
Medical malpractice, things like that. Oh, okay. Were you able to hear me in terms of what's considered personal injury?
I think we got the gist of it. The personal injury is usually a larger range of things, from car accidents. I'm guessing I think you ended on medical malpractice and a few other things.
Yeah.
For a moment there, we blanked out on the volume, but I think we got you back.
Oh, good. So, and there can be an overlap. For example, you can have somebody who's injured in a work-related car accident, and there's a workers' comp case against the employer, and also a personal injury case against the third party, meaning the entity other than the employer who was responsible, namely the driver and their insurance carrier for, in the other vehicle. So we have cases where it's a workers' comp case that we'll handle, and then on the personal injury end, we'll refer that out to a personal injury firm. So workers' comp is sort of a narrow niche just for work-related injuries only.
Gotcha. So how does the Pennsylvania Workers' Compensation Act affect what you do on a regular basis? How does it help you or hinder you from making sure that your clients are best represented and get the settlements that they deserve?
Well, really, it governs everything. I mean, everything emanates from the act in terms of what you have to prove, in terms of your burden of proof in court, the regulations regarding the exchange of evidence and how the hearings are conducted. And then, of course, you have the statute, which is the law, and then you have case law, which are decisions from judges in Pennsylvania. Either the workers' comp judges, the workers' comp appeal board, the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania, or the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, deciding issues and interpreting the law. So, but everything really, we always have the act right in front of our eyes, basically, because, most of your answers are right in front of you. You just have to read it. And if there's sort of a gray area, then you're going to pull up the research in terms of the cases and find out, what the rulings are with facts that are similar to your facts. So it all goes back to the statute. And I remember in law school, not on workers' comp, but in other areas of the law, that a lot of us would raise our hand and the professor would say, don't guess, don't argue, just read the statute. The answer is in front of you. And I always remember that because it's so true. A lot of times we try to outthink ourselves, and the answer sometimes is directly beneath your eyes. You just have to read the relevant paragraph. So, but yeah, that Pennsylvania Workers' Comp Act is very long, and it's not always in plain English. So, unfortunately, the injured workers, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, they need our services because they just don't. They're a fish out of water doing it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody gets injured and they're injured on the job, what are the steps that they should take to make sure that everything is taken care of as optimally as possible?
There's a lot of different elements. If I had to sort of distill it down, I would say number one is, at least in Pennsylvania, you have to report it because you're not going to be entitled to any wage loss benefits until you report it. And if you don't report the injury within 120 days of the injury or the first time you believed your injury may be work-related, then you have no claim at all. So giving notice to your employer is important. Most employers will have a panel of physician or physicians that you're supposed to see in the first 90 days. They're sort of biased doctors that are trying to minimize people's condition. Unfortunately, it's just they have control in that first 3-month period in most cases. And getting the right medical care, making sure your doctor's on your side and giving you the proper restrictions for work and proper treatment. So, and it sounds self-serving, but it's true. The earlier people lawyer up, the better their cases go. Workers' comps become really complicated in Pennsylvania, and people who navigate this on their own, they really struggle. So they might think it's like the adjuster is friendly and they're small talking with me and they seem like they're on my side, and then all of a sudden they finally realize it's an adversarial, contentious thing when they get a petition claiming that they're recovered or that their benefits are going to be reduced. So a lot of things are important, but one is giving notice of the injury to your employer as soon as you can, making sure you're getting medical treatment, and really getting an attorney on board quickly. It's a contingent fee. They don't have to fork over any money. We just get a 20% fee of the wage loss if we secure it, or if there's a settlement. So it's nice. It allows people to kind of level the playing field against, the big bad insurance company. They don't get billed by the hour like other types of law. So those are really the key things to look out for early on.
Yeah. One of the things I've always appreciated about attorneys who work on a contingency is, usually the justice system seems to work on, you get as much justice as you can afford. But when you work on a contingency fee, it means that the attorneys are going to vet you. They're going to make sure you have a good case, and you don't have to gamble on your future. You know that they're taking your case and they're fighting, and they have a vested interest in it, obviously. But I always thought that actually was a really good way to do law, because it's performance based, and you're never really paying anything. They're just, a small portion of the settlement gets handed over or whatever. But I always thought that was a very fair way to do it. And I wish there was ways to make that happen in other facets of the law. Obviously, I understand why it's the case that it can't, but I've always liked that. So over the last year, obviously we've been under the aegis of COVID and shutdowns and everything else. How has that affected workers? How has it affected injured people coming to you? How has it affected your law practice and how you serve your clients?
The biggest change has really been, going from working in the office to doing everything pretty much on your home computer. Although, now things are slowly going back to normal. But we got lucky in workers' comp here in Pennsylvania because our hearings never stopped. The personal injury trials in the common pleas court, they got stopped pretty much dead in their tracks. And so a lot of the personal injury attorneys were really struggling last year. And now things are getting back on track. But for workers' comp, we just went from hearing location and physically appearing to Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype videos for our hearings. And the nice thing about that, and of course, the COVID has just been horrific for everybody in the world, but the one upside was a lot less travel for the attorneys in our niche of the law. Normally, we're on the road every day. There's so many hearings in workers' comp and mediations and doctors' depositions and vocational experts, and you're really in a normal time on the road a lot. Then you get back and you have a lot of work to catch up on, and it's a long day. But doing everything by phone has been an incredible change of pace. There was a slowdown. There's less, people working. So especially last April, May, June, into last summer, we really saw less people calling us, and it really slowed down. And then it sort of started picking back up again. And the nice thing is, most firms are either busy or really busy. It's never, super slow. It's just people are always going to get hurt working, unfortunately. And but in terms of the practice, the biggest change has really been going from brick and mortar to just working, at home more and meeting clients, either just talking to them via phone or doing a Zoom call or things like that. But more and more people are willing to now come into the office and meet, as the vaccinations are happening and the COVID cases are going down a lot. So we're starting to see a little bit of a return to the pre-COVID era, but not quite there yet, as you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so let's get a little bit more deeper into who you are and how you operate. I'm a firm believer that there's really no such thing as a failure as long as you learn a lesson from it. One of my favorite questions to ask my guests is to tell us about a time that maybe you had something that could be considered a fail, right? But you probably learned something in the process that helped you better take care of your clients in the future. And it could be, a major loss. It could be something as simple as a piece of paperwork that wasn't filled out correctly. But what was a time that maybe you struggled with something that didn't turn out the way you were hoping? And what did it teach you, Michael?
Well, I think early on in my career, in the early 2000s especially, I think one of the things I was struggling with was not the technical aspects of the law or how to present a case, but actually the client relations. In workers' comp, a lot of our clients are hurting, they're out of work, they're scared, their future's uncertain, they're not always in the best mood. And although they know theoretically we're on their team, they hired us, they can be very combative at times or frustrated with how long the process takes in court and so on and so forth. So I would say my first 5 to 10 years, especially, what I struggled with was keeping poised with the clients that were difficult and trying to learn how to handle them. I don't think I did a great job with it. The tension or the conversation I would let it escalate. And what I've kind of learned, the flip side would be, well, what's some of your success stories? It would sort of goes hand in hand. I think I've really learned now to handle the clients who might be deemed difficult a lot better and with a lot more grace, and to not interrupt them, to let them finish. They have a lot to say, to not take things personally, to let them get their frustrations out, and then to address it in in kind of like a calm way. So client relations is really important, because if you're not syncing well with your clients, they'll just go somewhere else. And that's one thing I've really improved on a lot, is just sort of how to handle them. And nobody's perfect. Sometimes people are just over the they cross the line too far, where you just have to let them go and part ways. But there's a lot of those clients that are sort of in a gray area where it's not always sun and roses. There could be some tension, and knowing how to handle that, I think, is really really important to have a thriving practice. And the same thing goes for how you handle the other attorneys. I would let them get under my skin early on in my career. They would make a comment about my client or some kind of a cynical comment, and I would fight back, and then it would escalate, and sometimes even became personal. And I've really reflected a lot on that, especially the last 5 years, and have gotten much better at glossing over that stuff, knowing where to pick your battles, knowing how to step away from your email when you're heated up instead of regretting. Everybody, I think, has those moments where you say something in the heat of the moment, and then an hour later you're like, oh my God, why did I say that? And it doesn't look very professional, or whatever the case is. So, but anyway, it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think just client relations and getting better with that I really turned it around, which has been really helpful.
Gotcha. That's awesome. So how long does a typical case take? I know that there's going to be a wide variation. So maybe also, what was one of the longest cases you've had, and also what's one of the shortest cases you have? But for most people, when they come to talk to you, what kind of a time frame are you looking at from the beginning of the initial consultation, which you guys provide for free, to ultimate resolution of the case?
It's a great question, and I know it sounds like a lawyerly answer, but it depends. Um, you can have a case settled in a couple months. Maybe somebody was out of work for, 5 or 6 weeks. The insurance company doesn't want to spend a lot of money because on their end they're paying, billable hours to the defense attorney for the employer and the carrier. And so they might not want to spend a lot of money fighting it and getting an independent medical doctor and then paying that doctor thousands for his or her deposition and so on and so forth. So they can make a cost benefit determination early on and say, you know what, we denied this claim, but we're going to pay whatever they're owed and end it. If somebody recovered quickly. So you can have a case settled in a matter of weeks if it's a minor thing. And then if you're in court in terms of a petition that's being litigated, that can go 12 months in front of the judge, because each side is 3 months for their evidence, which is 6 months. And then you have a couple months for the written arguments that are called briefs. And then it's another several months till you actually get the decision. So if somebody has a denied claim and we file a claim petition and go to court and it's not settled, it can take up to 12 months to, sometimes it even spills into, 13, 14, 15 months, especially if the doctor's schedule's not jiving with the attorneys and we can't get a deposition date. So it can really take a while, but the good news is most of the cases do settle. I would say, I don't know, 70, 80% of the time, you don't go all the way to the finish line in front of the judge. The case is resolved for a lump sum payment. So although it can look daunting to hear, oh my God, I could be in court for a year, it doesn't happen in that many cases. Usually these things are resolved, but not always. And to answer the question about how long could you have a case, I mean, they can be in and out of court for years. I have a case where somebody was hurt in the 80s and the insurance company sort of dropped the ball. They never did an independent medical exam to try to shake things up. And, the individual's still on workers' compensation. Now, their comp rate is still low because it was based on the time of injury earnings.
Yeah.
And the price of everything else has gone up. And, you might, but that's a rare situation. There aren't many people who got hurt in the 80s that are on comp, but you can be on comp theoretically forever if you're totally disabled in Pennsylvania. But again, most cases settle. Some people just, they can't wait for a settlement and they find a job they like and they just have to jump on it. And sometimes there's, you might have a case with 20 different petitions. They're fighting over medical treatment and what's reasonable, or whether someone can do a certain job that was offered. It's really a case-by-case thing. So people don't like hearing that, but it's just the truth. You don't know until you know who the other attorney is, who the doctors are, the judge, sort of how it's going to all play out, until you're kind of in the middle of it.
Gotcha. Okay. So on the screen right now, I've still got your website up. And of course, you've got your little case results banner going right there. One of the things our listeners always love to hear, we love to hear the failures, obviously, because we're all human. And again, as long as you learn from a failure and you can walk away from it a better person, it's not really a fail. It's just a slow burn of a win. But we also love to hear about big successes. So can you tell us, Michael, about a couple of cases you've had that just resolved amazingly well? Maybe even better than you expected, or just that you're particularly proud of. The individuals really needed extra help, and you were able to get that for them. Tell us about a couple of cases that you're really proud of.
One that comes to mind in particular, I have a client who unfortunately had been crushed by a machine at work about 5 years ago. Almost lost his life. He was in the hospital for, I can't remember, 9 months or so.
Wow.
Lost his leg. The other leg, he has basically no use of, and he had massive internal injuries, just a horrific situation. And a personal injury firm had looked into whether there was a personal injury case, and they weren't able to find one. So they referred it out to me for the workers' comp part of the case, because they don't handle that. And the client needed his home remodeled to suit, his use of the wheelchair, and he needed his car remodeled. There was a lot of work and a lot of contentiousness on the other side, because they didn't want to pay for certain things, and with respect to the car, they didn't want to pay for certain things, and I just had to grind it out and battle and battle and battle, and it took probably a year and a half or so to get the issues resolved, where we were able to get his entire house rebuilt to suit him, so that he could function at a reasonable level and have ramps and all these kind of things. Mm-hmm. And also have his car situated so that he could drive it using his hands for the controls. And then there was a fight with respect to one of his medicines and whether it was work related. They wanted to fight us on that, and we won that issue in front of the judge. And it's just one thing after another. And the client has so much grace for what he's been through. It is just incredible. It's actually really inspiring. There's a lot of people who've been through nightmares like that, and that's probably an understatement. They could be very jaded or nasty to the world and really have an attitude which would be understandable. Mm-hmm. And this client doesn't. He's just incredible. So there's been a lot of fights in this case, and we've been able to get a lot of things accomplished for him to make his life as easy as possible. And it hasn't settled in terms of a global settlement yet. He's still getting his workers' comp checks, and there's still some fights going on with the medical. But it wasn't one big moment in that case. It was a lot of little things. But it's a unique case because of just the severity of the injury and how horrific it was. So that one really stands out in terms of feeling that sort of pride and that success with respect to a case. I think that one's sort of at the top of the heap for me.
Gotcha. Well, that's a good one. And it's always good. I think one of the things I like the most about personal injury law, workers' comp law is, again, you're helping people who have been injured and need help. They need assistance, and you're really making a difference in people's lives that otherwise they may not be able to affect on their own. Almost certainly they would be able to affect the level that you guys, as experts in your field, are able to affect. So,
it's a really good point. It's something that I feel really lucky to be in this niche, because just as you said, there's a tangible result in these cases. It's like you either get a check for them that comes every week and they can feed their family, mm-hmm. or you don't, or maybe there's some other issues with regard to their medical treatment. And the impact is so direct, and it's sort of black and white in a lot of situations. And when you can produce that income for them and ability to feed their family, the satisfaction level is just incredible. So I think you made a great point there, because I think about that a lot. It's like I feel just lucky to be able to have that impact on them, because you see the direct result of it. It's not something that's just written down on paper or indirect. It's very tangible.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, here in a minute, Michael, I'm going to do something that I do with a lot of my clients. I'm going to give you a magic wand. And with this magic wand, you can make a change to any law or anything that you deal with on a regular basis that directly affects you or directly affects your clients. So think about that for just a minute. And while you do that, we're going to take another look here at your website. Obviously, this is CardamoneLaw.com. Obviously, free consultations are available. So you guys that are listening, we'll have full contact information for Michael and his law firm down below in the show notes below. We're going to jump over really quickly here and read from our second sponsor for today while Michael is thinking what he's going to do with his magic wand. Or if you need it, we can even upgrade you to a genie lamp. So, if you have a couple of areas you want to fix, we can do that as well. Our next sponsor, however, is hundreds of customers, Rocket SEO. Are you a small business owner who knows that being on page one of Google is important, but you're afraid to work with a search engine optimization company because you know that SEO is both expensive and slow? Well, it doesn't have to be. Not anymore. Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers forces you to page one of Google safely and legally through the power of the news media. Rocket SEO utilizes national news media campaigns across the gamut of news sites that simply rank instantly. With Rocket SEO, you can boost your website's ranking in Google in 1 week or less with a simple system that leverages the power of major media companies, news sites, and affiliates of ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, as well as local news sources like the Boston Herald, the Sacramento Bee, and all stops in between, all across the United States to put you on page one of Google in under a week, oftentimes 2 or 3 times on page one for dozens of different keywords. To learn more, you can email press@hundredsofcustomers.com or visit hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. That's all spelled out, hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. All right. So, Michael, here's the magic wand. I'm going to hand it to you via the power of Zoom. What are you going to change to make your life, the way that you handle your clients or their lives, easier, better, etc.?
Well, this might be a little technical, but there's a part of the workers' comp law that I think would be great if it was changed. It would help so many people. Here's the situation: somebody submits their claim, gets investigated, and they get a denial. So they're not getting any benefits. In our system here in Pennsylvania, we then have to file a claim petition and litigate that. And as I said earlier, that can take up to a year. And meanwhile, many of our clients are starving. Sometimes they even become homeless. If they can't get on unemployment comp and they have no savings, they're in a really, really horrific situation. If I could change something, I would change the law where the injured workers, if they could make an initial showing of a probability of success, sort of like a preliminary screening of showing some basic testimony and some medical records that they were in fact hurt at work, that the judge could award benefits initially if there was a strong showing, and then at the end of the case, if it turned out that they were incorrect or they believe the employer's side of things, they could then have the employer or insurance carrier go after a fund for reimbursement, not from the injured worker, but there's a thing called a supersedious fund that we have. So that's the one thing that drives me bonkers, because so many of these people, they get starved, and it also lowers the settlement values because they become desperate to settle, because there's no way to quickly get a decision from a judge the way the law is. And so this would remedy that. But I think I'm not a fool. I think there'd be a lot of pushback on this idea. The insurance companies would really rail against it, because they would say, well, there's not a decision on the merits and we haven't had a chance to take depositions of everybody. But it's a really sort of sickening situation for a lot of people, because a lot of these denials have no basis for them. The insurance companies make money by just issuing the denials, and 2 or 3 out of every 10 people will just go away. They won't talk to a lawyer. They think that's the final word. They've heard something bad about an attorney, and so they don't appeal it, and they lose so much money. It's incredible. So maybe a little bit of a technical thing, but if I had that wand, I would change that, because it would help so many different people to be able to survive financially.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting concept. I've never heard anyone make a suggestion like that before, and I like the concept. So we'll see. Maybe we can work towards that in the future. So if you were to be able to encounter a young Michael Cardamone, maybe fresh out of Villanova, what advice would you give him as he starts moving into law?
I would say make sure you have a mentor. For me, that's been the biggest thing. That first job that I had, there was an individual, and I still look to him for a lot of advice when it comes down to a tricky situation or maybe an ethical issue that I want to make sure I'm being, making the right decision about, and things like that. It's really important, because I think like anybody, attorneys are going to be influenced by people they're working with and people they're around. And so I got lucky at that first firm to really to be able to deal with somebody who's handles the situations properly, they're ethical, they work hard, they don't take shortcuts, they review all their records, they behave appropriately in court, they're on time. These kind of things are really important. So yeah, I would say make sure you have a mentor. And also I would remind myself or whoever it is that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. A lot of people that I went to law school with are not practicing law anymore. Some of them went to a bigger firm and maybe they got burned out, where they had an opportunity with another business or whatever. So I think a lot of people come out of law school and they feel like they have to hit it big right away. But your career is a long career. If you're lucky to be healthy, you're only about 22 or 23 when you come out of law school, unless you're a non-traditional student and go back later, of course. But a lot of the attorneys are young. You have, 30 or 40 years. So just in terms of mindset, I think that can be really helpful for people. And also to not be afraid to change jobs. I think there used to be a stigma about sort of jumping around from job to job, but I went from one firm to two others, and then finally opened up my own firm 7 or 8 years ago. And those opportunities led me to where I needed to be. I think a lot of people feel like they're just going to stick it out somewhere and be kind of half satisfied. But I think moving around can really be helpful because you learn a lot from every different experience. And I think a lot of people get into a mindset like they're going to work for one place and just stay there, even if they're not really happy.
Yeah.
So I would tell people, have a mentor, 2, have a long-term mindset, and 3, don't be afraid to try a new firm, or jump around a little bit to see what you really, really are passionate about.
Gotcha. No, that's great advice for just about anybody, really, let alone young Michael. So very good. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you got a lot on your plate. You got a lot of clients to see. I do always like to give my guests the final word. Do you have any parting thoughts of wisdom you'd like to leave with our listeners, other than what you just shared, which really was good advice for almost anybody?
Well, for upcoming attorneys or young attorneys, I would just say that the biggest thing I take pride in is just be honest in your dealings. I think if you're honesty seems so fundamental and basic, but if you build your practice, or if you have your own firm, if you build everything around that policy, same with your employees, everything else, falls into place. And also being yourself. I think a lot of people they're trying to fit a role or play a role versus letting their own personality shine. And you have to be able to bring in clients if you're a lawyer. You can be great at all the technical aspects, but if you're not able to bring in work, you're going to be a dinosaur. You're going to kind of you're not going to be around that long thriving. So you need to kind of show people who you are, your real personality. And I think honesty is the other key element, which has helped me, at least in my career.
Gotcha. No, that is good stuff. Well, Michael, thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy day in order to talk with us here on the Attorney Post. To everyone listening, as always, thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Attorney Post. As always, all discussions on this podcast do not constitute legal advice. So if you do have a serious situation, please seek out legal counsel. Obviously, if you are in the Pennsylvania area and you have suffered an accident on the job, a great attorney you can turn to would be Michael Cardamone and his law firm, Cardamone Law, which is at Cardamone, CardamoneLaw.com. Obviously, again, we'll have links to his information in the show notes. You've been listening to The Attorney Post. You can find us online, as always, at theattorneypost.com. You can also find our channel on YouTube, as well as our podcast on almost all major podcast platforms, including Audible, Spotify, Amazon, Google, etc. We always do appreciate likes, subscribes, and shares, as well as comments. So please feel free to leave any of those down below. And until next time, remember, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Thank you guys, and bye-bye.